Welcome everyone to week 3 office hours. So there are 3 of us here this week, myself, Otto, and we're really happy to be joined by Dana Cunningham, who many of you met in the guest faculty videos over the last few weeks. So today we're going to go over 3 main things. First, we're going to give you a little sense of where we are in the U Lab right now. Then we're going to talk with Dana, going to share some of the questions that you had for her with Dana and hear what she has to say. And then Otto will reflect on some of the experience with the coaching circles, and we'll talk a little bit about how to get prepared for the live session on this coming Thursday. So to get started, a little bit of where we are in the course. So we are still in the co-sensing phase right now. What we wanted to do was to give you a little bit, we've heard from a number of you that it's taking a little longer than we had planned for you to do co-sensing activities, which is totally understandable. So the first thing that I wanted to share is that we're going to extend the deadline in the certificate track until October 15th. The reason being, we're still in the left side of the U going down to the bottom of the U. Really, you can consider that a co-sensing phase. So we're going to give you a little bit more time to do those activities. That's the first thing. We've also heard from a number of you, understandably, that information is in a lot of different places in the course. So we had the idea just 10 minutes ago, actually, that we'll use the course info page, the part that you sign into on edX, and every day, maybe every 2 days, we'll post just basically a daily digest of what are the main things that we're noticing that you're sharing with us going on in different spaces in the course, which will hopefully deal with this sense that many of you have of guilt of not being able to keep up with everything. So,
which was my experience.
Otto's been in Costa Rica for the last few days, which maybe he'll share a little bit about. And so, yeah, so that was basically it for the beginning. So why don't we just move into some of the questions. For Dana, you had a lot of questions on the discussion board. I worked through a number of them and found a few common themes that I wanted to share. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us here, Dana. It's always great to have you here. Basically, I picked out 3 main themes that I heard from many of you. And I wanted to start with a question from Sarah in Oakland, who says, I watched your videos. Do you have examples of this type of transformational co-sensing in a community development context in cities? So she went on to say, any examples of transformative community development projects that bring the heart focus into the public realm would be really welcome. And I know you've been doing some work in those areas.
So actually, we do a lot of work in those areas. So I sit inside the Community Innovators Lab, which is in the Department of Urban Studies. Most of the work we do is around community development, equitable community development in cities. So it's a perfect question. One of our biggest projects right now is in the Bronx in New York, which is the poorest urban county in the US. And despite being one of the poorest urban counties in the country, it has tremendous wealth. And there is a huge question about how can a place that is awash in wealth also generate so much poverty? It is a huge sensing question, which is not just about the economic structures or the business practices that exist in that place. It's also actually about who is considered human, and what does it mean to disregard huge numbers of people as if they were not there or as if they were not human. And when I say what does it mean to disregard, what does it mean for large institutions to be sitting in the middle of areas of deep poverty and spend a lot of money to supply themselves with materials and goods, to have services provided for them, and not think about using those assets to support the community surrounding where the hospital, for example, or the university is. So in this project, we are working on 2 dimensions. One is with the people who live in surrounding communities, asking the question, what are the structures that are allowing wealth and resources to leak out of our communities? And on the other hand, asking the major institutions, how could you see yourselves being a different kind of neighbor in this place and using all of the resources that you have at your disposal to enhance the lives and livelihoods in this place, not only to make sure that your business runs smoothly.
So I heard you, I mean, one of the things I heard you say is talking a lot about the quality of questions that are being asked.
Yes.
So what advice would you have for Sarah and maybe for others who are working in community development context specifically? How can we put these things into practice?
So I would say that for us, we bring a participatory action research framework to this. So we start with, what does the community want to know? What are the community's aspirations? That is not an abstract question for us. It means finding partners, working with partners in the community that have deep roots and that have histories of addressing questions that are relevant to the residents in the community. And so for us in the Bronx, we have a set of partners who actually define a lot of the research questions that we have. So they are the ones who came to us and said, look, right now the city is proposing a not a stadium, the development of an armory. And we actually think that's a bad idea, and we want to do more than kill the development proposal. We actually want the tools to think about what would be needed for us, for the local economy to provide for our needs. So that was kind of the starting point, and that began actually a co-sensing journey where we took a group of MIT students to the Bronx to sit with our community partners to help, sharpen the questions around the kinds of things that urban planning can address. And then through understanding what the questions were, doing sensing journeys, the community partners and our students together, figuring out what kinds of information were relevant to this question of how do we make this economy better address our interests.
Maybe elaborate a little bit on the anchor institution concept,
Sure.
because that might be another practical hint how to engage.
Sure. So anchor institutions are institutions that are embedded in a place with a lot of physical plant and sunk costs. They can't leave. Integral to their mission is the place that they are in. And so...
Like who?
Oh, like hospitals, universities, cultural institutions. So, you can't kind of pick up a hospital complex and go someplace else if you don't like the neighborhood anymore. And so you have an interest in supporting the development of the neighborhood. And you may not understand that because many big institutions that are in urban cores see themselves at war with the community around themselves. And many of them choose to sort of build bigger walls and bring in more security. But another approach is to say, actually, we are one of many neighbors. And if we think strategically about all of the assets we bring, our hiring, we have a lot of jobs. In the Bronx, there is one major hospital that is the biggest employer in the borough. So does it ever think about using its employment requirements to think about local jobs? And it buys a lot of food, as do the local universities, and a lot of other kinds of supplies. And there are all kinds of logistics questions that are entailed in having the kinds of businesses they do. So how do you see yourself as an anchor of the economy, not just an institution that's stuck in a place that you may or may not like? And if you see yourselves that way and can imagine yourself co-creating with your neighborhood a better quality of life for yourselves, for your employees, for your officers, but also for those who may use your facility or may just be walking by your facility, but live there. If you can think about it that way, then it's kind of a change of frame, and it can lead to a more generative development approach. And we've seen this work in places like in Cleveland, where university hospitals ended up with, they had a massive expansion of their building, of their footprint, and they decided to use it as a hiring opportunity for local residents, which meant they had to do construction training. And it became a massive project of looking at the local economy and seeing all the different ways they could contribute. And in addition to ticking up the employment profile of the neighborhood, they won so much respect of the neighborhood that their endowment increased tenfold just from charitable contributions because people were seeing them in an entirely different light.
Well, thank you so much, Dana. It's really interesting. And maybe if people have follow-up questions, we can post them on the discussion board. I feel like we could probably do a whole course on this. Maybe one day we will.
We have done one, and you can come and take the next version of it.
Very good. So I want to touch on a couple of other themes that came up. I'll read a next question from, I believe it's Rocio in Madrid. So this is around questions of equality and sexism. She said, I also feel angry when it comes to inequalities. More concretely, I feel angry because of sexism and how women are treated in this world. However, anger weakens me. I'd like to understand why that anger, which is something that was a main theme in a lot of your videos that people commented on, why that anger gave you power at one point in your life and how you're dealing with it now.
It's a great question. And I just want to say that anger doesn't have an on-off switch. So it's not like some things happened and I'm not angry anymore. I think that's a really important thing because it's not like, I think, at least for a person who has experienced marginality, and I think most people at some point in their lives experience some dimension of marginality, you don't ever lose that feeling. You don't ever completely sort of get beyond being angry when you feel disrespected or marginalized or disregarded in some way, or if you see people you love or people you care about or people in the world being disregarded. So, you know, anger is a really complicated thing, as are all human emotions. And I think the question is, how do you stay curious about it, I think is a way of putting it. And that's a question of kind of open heart. So, to my mind, in the beginning, when I first started understanding and seeing social injustice for what it was, and I should back up and tell you that my parents were of this generation that believed that the world was going to fix itself in their time. And so they didn't want to talk to us about any of that stuff because they thought it would bias my sister and I against hope and possibility. So it didn't exist as far as they were concerned. And then I got into the real world, and lo and behold, there it was, even though, you know, they kind of told me, they kind of ignored it. You know, they used to like whisper and, you know, with each other. Now, I grew up during the height of the civil rights movement, so there was all of this turmoil, and yet my parents had this idea, you know, that it was all going to go away by the time we were old enough to figure it out. So when I started seeing signs of, in my case, racial injustice and women's oppression, at first, I thought there was something about me. I thought there was something wrong with me because people didn't like me, and I didn't think I had given them a reason that I knew of why they didn't like me, or I could see it coming from, you know, towards other people. So I thought there was something wrong with us, and it was very helpful to me to become angry when I realized it wasn't me. So one thing that anger does is it's a clarifying kind of purifying flame in a way that it helps you think, it has the possibility of enabling you to see structurally some things that you might not see if you are stuck in feeling that it's just you. And on any given day, that feeling is there and it can be useful. The question is, if you're not curious about it, and you're not understanding that there's more, you know, that you can't have a generative world that's based only on anger, if you don't have that, then you can get stuck in one single mode, and that mode is anger, and that leads to hatred and violence. And so the other question becomes, what's there to be curious about? What are the other dimensions of experience, and what are the other ways that you can connect to people that help you find a path towards a generative life personally and a more generative world. So here's the other thing, is that I find it's actually exhausting to be angry all the time. It's exhausting to be in fight mode all the time. It really helps sometimes. You don't have a choice. But it really also helps to see through and see something different. So just a few weeks ago, I was in Bolivia, and I got pulled out of line at the airport and interrogated for being a drug dealer, and taken in a back room that was kind of creepy, and x-rayed without any protection. And it was a horrifying, humiliating, isolating experience. I was the only African American in the line. Looked to me like I was being treated like I've been treated many times in the past. It felt very isolating and very humiliating. And when and the guy who did this was very nice. And he himself was indigenous. And I had all kinds of sort of automatic empathy for somebody who was kind of brown like me. And, you know, so my first reaction coming out of that grungy room was humiliation and sadness. And I actually burst into tears. And I was feeling victimized. But then I was like furious. It's like, no matter where I go in the world, really, does everybody hate people of African descent? And am I always going to have this experience anywhere in the world? Then I started talking to people, and they were talking about how bad the drug problem is in Bolivia. You know, and how, yeah, I got pulled out of line. And then I was with somebody else at another leg of the journey, and they got pulled out of line. All of these things coexist. I think I was targeted. I think I was racially profiled. I think the country is under siege from drug dealers. And I think they have to do something about it. And I'm saying the curiosity comes in being able to hold all of that and try to move towards a generative stance that somehow affirms humanity and doesn't eat your own soul and condemn everybody else's soul around you.
Well, it's a powerful, I mean, it's hard to think of a more powerful example of what you're describing about curiosity. I don't know if you want to, brings up any reflections for you, Otto?
Not that I have anything even remotely similar or powerful, but as you said, kind of marginality is, you know, you can experience on many different levels. And in part also levels when you see exclusion happening to others.
Yes.
So, so to some degree, if you haven't been angry, you could say, you know, probably you haven't really empathized with,
That's right.
with the entire ecosystem you're dealing with. But so my question is, so there is kind of, we all probably remember instances of this anger, which is also like an energy that
Yes.
you can, you know, that you can tap into. And then I think there is this switch from being the anger to seeing the anger,
Yes.
kind of that you refer to in, you know, with the word curiosity. So I just wonder, because that's really kind of where, you know, the shift in awareness happens when you move from being the anger to seeing the anger. Could you just talk about that? Because it's not that we always have to do that. Sometimes maybe we want to stay in the being. But if you want to shift to the seeing the anger, how does that really work?
That's really a great question. And it really, for me, depends on the day. I think I just cannot stress enough that as humans, you know, we are who we are, and we are only works in progress. We are not more than that. And so I think actually even just knowing that there is a difference between being the anger and seeing the anger is a huge relief. Because when you are the anger, and that is your whole identity, it really gives you very few options for how to act. And then that really constrains your creativity, it constrains your strategic thinking. It doesn't mean that you ever forget the anger, but the difference between standing there and being this emotion and stepping away and looking at yourself being affected by that emotion is a huge amount of space that you allow yourself. that gives you a minute to act, that gives you a minute to empathize, that gives you a minute to just open up the possibility that there's another way of responding besides just pure anger. And to me, that's the difference between desperation and hope, actually.
Thank you so much for these reflections so far. And I think we just have one more question that we can bring up here, which is coming from Allison in Scotland. And so she asks about, she said she was reading an article about intersectionality in feminism and wondering how that connects to presencing in Theory U. Can you explain to us what is intersectionality for those of us who don't know? And then talk about, so where do you see the connections or differences?
So as I understand intersectionality, it is this idea that humans are comprised of multiple identities and multiple experiences in societal contexts such that they experience different dimensions of society differently. And so you are never just one thing. You are never just a black or a woman or undocumented or disabled, but you can be many of those things, and at various points different dimensions of your identity can come out. And so it is meant both to make it in some ways easier to understand the complexity of human experience, and also obviously make it harder. It does become harder to sort of put it all together when you understand all these different dimensions. And so I think the important lesson or insight from intersectionality is that we do not have, as humans, as complex beings, we do not have a single identity, and the way we interact with society can be complicated and interesting and not predictable. And so it's actually, to my mind, understanding all the different dimensions of human identity and experience is connected to this idea of seeing from the whole, seeing the whole human in all of her complexity, and also seeing in any particular context, not simply your own specific point of view or experience, but being able to pull back and see the totality, or as much of the totality as you can, not simply your institutional, your personal, your identity perspective.
So just a segue from that observation to where we are in our overall journey. As Ada mentioned in the beginning, we are really moving down the U, and later this week we'll have this next live session, which really happens at the bottom of the U process. So it's really completing the first part of the journey and then launching us into the second part of our journey that will revolve around exploring the future by doing. Now, many of you, in moving through the first part of the U, which really is opening up and engaging our environment in new ways, many of you explored that by deepening your own process of listening. But how do you know on which level of listening you're working? Basically, if nothing that you heard is new, that's level 1. If you discover something new, that's level 2. If you begin to see through someone else's eye, that's level 3. But what is level 4? Level 4 is essentially about what you just talked about, which is a subtle shift in my own identity, in my own blended sense of who I am. A little loosening up of these boundaries and, exploring more with, connecting more with what's emerging. So there's a little letting go and letting come, not only on the level of ideas or perspective, but also on the level of who I am, on the level of self. And that essentially is what level 4 is about, and that's what we really just have been talking about. Many of you have experiences like that, as we heard from the feedback, also during the coaching circles. So many of you already did the first, some of you did already 2, others are just about to do their first ones. Now,
we know from the feedback that many of you had great sessions, but I believe that's also not true for all the coaching sessions. So, and just feedback to you from other processes that I have seen, mostly kind of the first round of coaching circles is a little bit mixed because you first need to learn how to do it, and then the second, third, fourth, much better quality. So just like 4 summarizing points, what to pay attention to in the case clinics. Number 1, what makes for a great case clinic? Number 1, so 4 leverage points. Number 1, quality of time and space that you provide, which is kind of not, interfering with others. Create a safe place, basically, regardless whether it's physical or virtual. Number 2, the quality of listening that you give to each other, which is 0 judgment, 0 cynicism, kind of complete attending to each other with the mind and heart wide open. Number 3, talk about the real case, as we mentioned to you in the briefing video. And which is kind of the real existential threshold that you are facing as a community, as an organization, or as an individual. And lastly, follow the process. There is, we all are great and we all can reinvent processes as we go. But believe me, there is we tested this in thousands of case clinics. So there is a reason why there are these 7 steps. And there's a reason why one of them says stillness and the next says mirroring. And we give specific suggestions around which to do these practices. So really take the process, follow the process. That's kind of the number 4 suggestion. And if you do, you will see how the quality of your own of the outcomes that you create with your coaching or your case clinic circle session, how that will change. So those are 4 ideas. For Thursday, we will this time move more into the contemplative space. So make sure that you have a quiet space as an individual or as a group, and also make sure that maybe you have the following half an hour or hour or so. You don't schedule the next business meeting or something like that. You have a little extra space so that once we completed the live session, you can continue your own process, either in your own hub or maybe with just a quiet space that you have for yourself. We look forward to reconnect with you then and to continue the journey.